The middle portion of the winter break crept asymptomatically toward the new year. Originally, we had been looking forward to that mystery that Koizumi and his comrades had set up for us, but on the day we arrived at Tsurya's vacation house, we found ourselves wandering around its daydream-like interior, and to make matters worse, Nagato collapsed out of the ski slope, which even got Haruhi freaked out. Fortunately, upon returning to normal dimensionality, Nagato soon recovered, but no matter how you figure it, it was a crazy New Year's Eve, or December 30th, as the calendar figures it. The next day, New Year's Eve. We had finally come to the brink of a project that had been in the planning stages for some time. The winter version of a mystery game that the overachiever Koizumi had set up when we visited a remote island during summer vacation. Of course, this time we knew it was a game, but it was still the main event of this whole excursion. As for the disaster on the snowy mountain, the phantom villa, the nude fake Asahina, Euler's theorem or something, the feverish Nagato fainting, those were all unanticipated and undesired incidents. They weren't Haruhi's style, and I'd like to tell whoever or whatever was responsible that they'll get what's coming to them. Although Nagato was incapacitated, Koizumi and I, it's hard to say how useful Asahina the younger was, managed somehow. And now in the same villa that housed us, we had Tsurya as well as Koizumi's associates, none of whom should be underestimated. It would be stranger if something didn't happen. So, with the preparations completed, things could now proceed in an SOS Brigade style, or should I say Haruhi style, fashion. I had lingering doubts about whether this was the right way to end the year, but since I was the only one who seemed to hold such doubts, I kept my own counsel. Just to be clear, the dramatis personae of this episode were me, Haruhi, Nagato, Asahina, Koizumi, Tsurya, my little sister, Shamisen, the Calico Cat, Mori, and Arakawa, along with the brothers Keiichi and Yutaka Tamaru, who arrived that day. After Haruhi's urging, Koizumi's Mystery Tour Part 2 began. The morning of New Year's Eve, after polishing off the breakfast that Mori and Arakawa prepared for us, we assembled downstairs in Tsurya's villa. The first floor was an open common area. The floor consisted of about 20 tatami mats arranged upon a Japanese cedar base, almost like a stage for performing No or Kyogen theater. In the middle of the room was a sunken hearth table that could easily sit 8 people. The space seemed designed for letting guests relax and make merry to their heart's content. The floor was also heated, of course, and a quiet heater fan in the corner blew a warm breeze through the room, so both the common area and the hallway were kept effortlessly warm. Through the windows, the clear blue of the sky above the ski slope was perfectly smooth, as though airbrushed onto a smooth acrylic board, but there would be no snow sports today. "I'm still a little worried about Yuki, so let's play inside today," said Haruhi, putting a ban on skiing. Of course, Nagato herself had returned to her normal expressionless self, even saying, "It's nothing," to try to curtail Haruhi's nursing efforts, but once she decided something, Haruhi never reversed herself. "No, at least stay inside for today, until I'm sure that you're alright. No intense exercise or vigorous activity, okay?" Nagato just looked at Haruhi with those big eyes of hers, then looked to the rest of us in turn. I probably wasn't the only one who thought it was almost like she was saying, "I don't mind, but how do you guys feel about it?" "It would be worrisome to leave Nagato all alone while the rest of us went out. I agree with Haruhi. All of us facing doom in order to save just one. It makes a beautiful story, does it not?" said Koizumi pleasantly. Tsurya and my little sister, neither of whom were proper brigade members, also agreed. Shamisen dangled from my sister's arms. His opinion was unclear, but he didn't make any noise, so presumably he had no complaints. "Shall we push the plan forward, then?" said Koizumi, his gaze pointed out the window. "I had originally planned to start the evening and end around midnight, but we can begin earlier." "Can't we just begin now?" I wondered, before the light of Haruhi's anticipation burns out my optic nerves. "Well, actually, it needs to start snowing again before that can happen. The weather forecast calls for snow showers starting around noon, so we'll have to wait till then." I had only dragged the heavy shamisen all the way out here because Koizumi had told me he needed the cat, and now he needed snow? If he needed snow, there are piles of the shit outside, I told him. "I need continuous, ongoing snowfall. I can't explain further. I don't want to ruin the trick." Having explained, Koizumi smiled to the calico cat in my sister's arms, who was for the moment behaving himself, then picked up the rucksack from next to the heater. "In anticipation of such a situation, I've brought several games. We can play indoors all day if need be." I got a little excited, but then Koizumi started taking analog board games out of his bag. I wonder if he had something against video games. Sure, we could play, but I was worried about Mori and Arakawa. Arakawa had acted as butler and chef, taking care of everything since our arrival the previous day, and Mori attended to us as a maid, although both of them were really members of the same Haruhi observing agency that Koizumi belonged to. Their demeanor was so servant-like that I felt bad, and I wondered if I should help clean up a little after meals or something. No, we're quite alright, the two of them politely assured me.
This is our job, after all.
Huh. Were they actually a butler and a maid? I was pretty sure that they were just pretending and were actually part of Koizumi's agency. Perhaps having noticed my doubts, Arakawa removed his businesslike mask and smiled. It's a gift from our occupational training, he said to me. Thus, neither of them were to be seen in the common area. Perhaps they were busily working away in the kitchen. As for the other two, Keiichi Tamaru, whose fortune from bio-something or some other large enough to buy himself a private island, and his brother, Yutaka, they wouldn't arrive until around 2 o'clock, by which time Haruhi had made herself a board game billionaire, leaving the rest of us bankrupt, and we moved on to lunch and Haruhi's nerve-wracking punishment games. The two brothers appeared in the common room where we were all playing, led there by Arakawa. Yeah, the trains were running late because of the new snow. We planned to be here in the morning. Keiichi Tamaru looked like a completely normal older guy, and his smile has been as nice as it was in the summer. Hey guys, it's been a while. The pleasant Yutaka Tamaru smiled even more brightly than Koizumi as he waved, then spoke to Surya. Pleased to meet you. My name's Tamaru. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be invited to the Surya family villa. Oh, don't worry about it, said Surya quickly. You're friends of Koizumi's, and you put together this game for us, so don't sweat it at all. I love stuff like this. No matter who she was talking to, Surya had a way of making friends in 15 seconds. I wonder if Asahina's homeroom class was like this too. The second-year guys in that class must be pretty happy. Mori and Arakawa immediately paid their respects. Would you care for some lunch? Asked Mori with a small smile. No thank you, we ate on the train, replied Yutaka. I think we'd like to put our luggage in our room. Very good, sir. I'll take it up for you then. Arakawa politely nodded, then looked at Koizumi. Well then, everyone. Koizumi stood and addressed the room like a priest conducting a marriage ceremony. With everyone assembled, let us begin the game. I should apologize to the Tamaru brothers, who only just arrived. Koizumi's smile was a bit forced. Was he unsure whether the game would go smoothly, or did some foolish punchline await us? Let me state again that the only victim will be Keiichi. There are no plans for this to become a serial murder case. Also, there is one murderer, and only one. Do not worry about multiple culprits. You need not consider motive. It has no meaning in this game. Finally, I would ask that starting now, he pointed to the clock on the wall, from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., no one other than Arakawa and Mori may leave the common area. Yutaka, that goes for you as well. If you need to attend to anything before we begin, please do so now. Is everything understood? Everyone nodded. It's still 7 minutes till 2, but that's fine. Shall we begin? Said Keiichi Tamaru, which at Koizumi nodded. Well then. Reprising his role from this summer as the victim, Keiichi scratched his head, apparently a bit uncomfortable with being the center of attention. My room's in the small building, a bit removed from the main house, right? Yes, I can show you the way, said Mori. I think I'll take a bit of a nap. I actually awoke rather early today. I'm running a little short on sleep. My nose is acting up as well. May have got a cold. Well, now that you mention it, Keiichi, you are allergic to cats, Yutaka said. Perhaps that's the trouble. Even for an act, this was all way too fake. Ah, that could be it. Oh, please don't worry about me. The allergy's not that severe. It can be rough in a small room, but I'll be fine in a large space like this. Then, as though to really hammer the point home. Will someone please wake me up around 4:30? Will that be all right? 4:30? Understood, sir. Mori bowed, then returned to her upright, elegant posture. This way, please. Having delivered that series of obviously expository lines, Keiichi disappeared into the hallway after Mori. It was all so obvious. I'll take my leave then. Mr. Yutaka, I'll take your luggage. Arakawa, the butler, gave a full 90-degree bow, then quickly gathered up the bag and coat and left. Having watched the three leave, Koizumi cleared his throat deliberately. Well then, that concludes the opening. Please enjoy yourselves in the common area for the next hour. Now wait just a minute. It was Haruhi who objected. There's an external building? I don't remember that. Sure there is, said Surya. There's a little place separate from this house. Didn't you see it? I did not. Koizumi, there's no fair hiding clues. You have to tell us these things. Let's all go and take a look at it. You were going to see it later anyway. Koizumi's smile was weak in the face of his already disintegrating plans, but after looking at the clock, he seemed to decide that the situation was salvageable. Understood. There's no harm in doing this much. This way! Surya walked along, taking the lead. Everyone else followed behind, of course, even my sister, carrying shamisen. Not that one person and one cat were going to be of any use in solving the mystery. Leaving the common area, we came to a hallway that ran parallel to a courtyard. The outside-facing walls were glass, so the garden was plainly visible. Somewhere along the line it had started to snow. The accumulated snow was about knee-deep. The garden was totally covered in white, yet somehow I got the sense that it had been done in a Japanese style. In the middle of the courtyard was a small hut. After taking a minute's walk, we came to the door that led to the courtyard, which Sudia opened and then pointed. "That's the place! My grandfather used it to meditate. He hated people, see? So whenever he had to come visit, he'd say something about getting away from my grandma and then lock himself in there. It's like, if you don't like it, don't come, right? But he'd get ticked off when we didn't invite him. Tough guy to please." I tried to notice every little detail. A path led from the main house to the garden shack, but it had no walls. Only a roof protected the stone path from snow. Even on days we had light snow showers like today, things wouldn't go so well if there were a blizzard. The freezing air gave all of us a chill as it blew through the open door. Shamisen was partially affected, and he rigged around trying to get back to his warm bed. My sister seemed to find this very funny, and before I could stop her, she walked out of the stone pathway in her slippers, bringing Shamisen closer to the drift of snow.
Look, Shammy, it's snow. Wanna taste it?
Shamisen thrashed around like a bonito on a hook, and as soon as he jumped free of my sister's arms, he expressed his heartfelt irritation of a "Meow" as he disappeared back inside the house. No doubt he was returning to the heated floor to continue his nap.
Goodness.
Having shown Keiichi to his place, Mori walked back along the stone path with a floating grace. Her smile had an ageless quality to it.
Is something the matter? If you're looking for Mr. Keiichi, he would be here in the shack.
"Are you sure?" asked Haruhi. Her face was already suspicious. "Quite sure," said Koizumi. "That's what the script says." Once we returned to the common area, the clock pointed to 2 o'clock on the nose, and Koizumi seemed to sigh in relief.
I'll say this one more time. Please do not leave this area until after 3 o'clock. If you absolutely must, please tell me.
Koizumi went over to his backpack in the corner and took out another item. If there was more, why didn't he just take it all out at once? Something suddenly occurred to me. Shamisen was nowhere to be seen. Koizumi had left his bag in the corner with the heater, and lately the pillow in front of the heater's vent had been the cat's preferred location. I thought for sure he'd been spitefully sleeping there, but no. Just I was trying to think about it.
Shall we try this game to pass the time? Suzumiya, will this do?
My questions were erased by Koizumi speaking.
Sure,
said Haruhi, sounding somehow pleased with herself.
It might be a little early, but we'll wind up playing anyway, so we might as well. Give me that, Koizumi.
Koizumi handed over the bag, whereupon Haruhi took something curious out of it. Some sheets of paper with pictures drawn on them, along with corresponding number of envelopes. She spread them out on a hearth table around which we all sat. I was suddenly filled with a sense of nostalgia.
It's Fukuwara I,
said Haruhi.
You played it when you were a kid, right? Just pin the eyes, noses, and mouth on blank faces while blindfolded. I'd planned to play tomorrow, but we've got time, so let's do it now. Plus, this ain't just any old Fukuwara I.
Well, that much was obvious. Just looking at the facial outlines and hairstyles, it was clear that they were caricatures of our faces. They were drawn well enough that even without eyes or noses, you could still tell who was who. I could see why Haruhi was so proud of them.
I drew these! They're handmade, even one for Sudia. And I knew Kion's little sister was coming, so I made one for her too. Sorry, Yutaka, I didn't really remember your face.
Oh, don't worry, said Yutaka easily. That's probably for the best, really.
Yeah, probably.
Haruhi grinned and looked over the brigade members.
Ready? We're gonna play with our own faces. And no do-overs. When the faces are done, we're gonna glue them someplace and hang them in the clubroom wall. So be serious. If you don't, you'll be stuck with a weirdo version of your face in our clubroom forever.
Her thinking was something else. She'd done an amazing job of capturing everybody's features. If we managed to line them up right, they'd really look like cartoon versions of us. Based on that alone, we'd want to be serious about it. Still, when did she have time to do this?
Alright, who's going first?
Said Haruhi. Sudia's hand shot up energetically. Hers was the only one. While Sudia was a force to be reckoned with, even she didn't have X-ray vision. Blindfolded with a towel, she made a hilarious arrangement of her own features that caused the table to burst into laughter, and when she herself saw the completed portrait, she rolled over and nearly died. Not even a laugh bag could be so funny. Next up was Koizumi, whose clever, handsome features were totally ruined. When the blindfold was removed and he saw the results of his work, he made a disappointed face. But I couldn't really laugh since my turn was up next. I never felt so nervous playing Fukuwara I. Just as I was psyching myself up for it.
Excuse me for a moment,
Koizumi muttered to me.
I need to speak with Arakawa et al. About tomorrow's arrangements.
And with that, he left the common area. I didn't know what he needed to meet with them about, but that wasn't my problem at the moment. The fate of the clubroom portrait was in the hands of my own sense of spatial orientation. My round of Fukuwara I ended with a burst of laughter. Oh well, it would have spoiled the mood if I had arranged a perfect face, I suppose. But hey, Tsuruya, you're laughing a little too hard, though. As I took off the towel amid Tsuruya's and Haruhi's cackling, I saw Koizumi return. Reflexively, I checked the clock. It was past 2:30. Pardon my absence. For some reason, Koizumi had gone somewhere and returned carrying shamisen. What was he doing with the cat? I asked him. Nothing. He was just following Mori around too much in the kitchen. Koizumi set the calico down on the cushion in front of the heater, whereupon the cat curled up in front of the warm airflow. Putting a well-fed cat somewhere warm is the best way to get it to behave. How did you do? Koizumi sat down next to me at the table and took a look at the proceedings. My little sister had inflicted the paste upon her portraits of myself, Tsuruya, and Koizumi. Surely there was something better than these to decorate the clubroom with. Asahina's cosplay photos, for example. Time passed, and the game of Fukuwarai proceeded with Asahina, then Nagato. Asahina's hands were charmingly hesitant as she felt around for the parts of her face, and in the end, her portrait was just as charming. Nagato then completed a surrealist version of herself that absolutely slew Tsuruya. Nagato regarded her own work curiously, having no idea what was so funny about it. As we continue the play, excuse me everyone, it will soon be 3 o'clock. Koizumi made his announcement. I'd like everyone to take a short break. I'll need you all to stay here from 3 to 4 o'clock, so if you need to use the bathroom, now is your chance. Everyone left the room except Nagato, Yutaka, Koizumi, and me. Nagato continued to regard her Fukuwarai portrait, while Yutaka watched her profile, seemingly amused. I turned to Koizumi. When's the murder gonna happen? More important, will you take a look outside the window? Koizumi pointed outside. You can see that it's snowing, correct? Please remember that. If it hadn't been snowing, I would have had to ask you to pretend that it was, but fortunately, things are working out nicely. As I was scrutinizing Koizumi's easy smile, the 4 girls returned. Yutaka seemed like most likely suspect to me. He had no other role to play after all. Not that he was actually doing anything suspicious at the moment. Haruhi sat down next to the hearth. Koizumi, let's do that one next. Get out for me, huh? Understood. That game, yes? Koizumi again went over to his backpack. Wondering what handmade nonsense he was going to pull out this time, I followed him over. He rummaged around for a moment, then, looking back at me, produced a large sheet of paper by some sleight of hand. Please give this to Suzumiya. Koizumi handed me a large sheet of paper that was folded over onto itself. It fluttered slightly in the heater's breeze. As I tried to open it, I felt suddenly uneasy. It wasn't because of the big sheet of paper. There was Koizumi right next in front of me, his hand on the bag, and next to it was the heater. Also, there was shamisen, sleeping away on the cushion. There wasn't anything strange about it, and yet something was off. Had Koizumi seemed nervous when I'd gotten close to him? Kyon, what are you doing? Bring it over here! I reluctantly brought the mysterious sheet of paper back to the table, Koizumi following me. The clock indicated exactly 3 o'clock. Koizumi and I made it! Haruhi's pride seemed to hit a crescendo. It was written all over her face. It's a board game just for the SOS Brigade. I drew every square by hand, so you better be grateful. Incidentally, the first square my piece landed on said this. Kyon only, 30 push-ups. Other squares said things like, play strip, rock, paper, scissors with the next person who stops, or say 5 nice things to the chief, or answer everybody's questions honestly, and everybody has to ask the most embarrassing questions they can, and so on. It was a board game filled with Haruhi-style punishments. After much fuss, obviously we wound up playing it. Asahina and Yutaka landed on a strip, rock, paper, scissors square, but Asahina's blank face made it clear she didn't have the slightest idea what the terms meant, so I wound up playing in her stead. What followed was a parade of squares I can only assume were designated to exhaust me. An hour later, when Tsuruya finally reached the goal, I was about ready to collapse. I'm sure Koizumi didn't care about me a bit, but he raised his hand and spoke as though he'd been looking forward to it. Your attention please, everybody! It is now 4 o'clock, he announced like a timekeeper at a live broadcast. It is now free time. Please assemble back here by 4:30. Also, if possible, please refrain from going outside. Of course, that only applies if you are not the murderer. Well, if you excuse me, said Yutaka Tamaru, smiling meaningfully as he stood. I need to unpack the luggage in my room. Don't worry, I'll be back in 5. He left immediately thereafter, whereupon Haruhi announced, I'm going to the kitchen. And she did, taking Tsuruya with her, returning a few moments later bearing tea cakes and drinks. No one else left the table. Nobody wanted to be accused of being the murderer after all, especially if it wasn't true. Incidentally, I should add that Yutaka did indeed return 5 minutes later. It was just past 4:30 in the afternoon. Mori entered the common area and made an announcement. Mr. Keiichi is not answering the door. She pretended to look unsettled. I checked the shack, but there was no response, and the door has been locked. It's time! Haruhi said, standing up gallantly. We'll need to check the scene of the crime first. Every inch the tour guide Koizumi headed down the hallway, the rest of us trailing behind. Upon opening the doors that led to the courtyard, we found outdoor shoes set out for us in advance. After putting them on and making our way to the path of the shack, we found Arakawa waiting beside the door. What's the situation? Said Haruhi. Just as Mori said, I'm sure. The door is locked from the inside, and Mr. Keiichi's the only one who has the key. Incidentally, there are no duplicates. However, there's no need to break the door down. Please simply assume that there are no duplicate keys. Arakawa, the key, please. Arakawa the butler extended his hand, which contained a key. This key does not really exist. Please act as though that were true. Koizumi opened the door, though, which Haruhi immediately strode. Hi. Keiichi waved at us, laying next to the futon. The elder Tamaru brother pointed to his chest. I've been stabbed again. A knife handle stuck out of his chest, a gag toy I'd seen before. Who stabbed you? Asked Haruhi. I can't say, I'm dead, after all, the corpses don't talk. With that, his hand flopped down onto the floor. Everyone, please, began Koizumi. Take a careful look around the room. The key to the shack is here on the desk. This is, of course, the one that Keiichi brought with him. That means that the murderer did not leave through the door. Koizumi approached the window that faced the veranda. The window is closed, but is not locked, which means that the killer escaped through it. Also, snow is piling up outside. Once Koizumi opened the window, we all peered out the courtyard. Allow me to explain the killer's escape route. We know that he or she did not leave through the door, but escaped through the window. While walking through the snow would of course leave footprints behind. None are visible. Look above the window. The eaves of the shack overhang all four corners, and directly beneath them, the layer of snow is very thin. The killer walked along the outside wall to get to the path that returns to the house. I looked down at the ground that Koizumi was pointing to, then back up to the sky. Snow was slowly falling. The falling snow has covered up the killer's footprints. Based on this rate of snowfall, the footprints wouldn't have disappeared in less than 30 minutes. Then, as to confirm that everybody understood, he added, This is the scenario. I ask for your cooperation. The corpse cannot talk, but as the game master, I will not deceive you. Haruhi looked back and forth from the snow to Koizumi, then frowned and folded her arms. Is that it? Koizumi pointed to the futon, something that seemed to be moving around the soft comforter. Could it be? It was Haruhi who pulled the comforter aside to reveal. Shamisen? It was definitely our cat, narrowing its eyes to the sudden light. We returned to the common area and sat around the table. Mori and Arakawa quietly stood back while Keiichi, his corpse duties concluded, was probably enjoying a nice cup of coffee somewhere. Let us put the facts in order. Keiichi entered the shack at exactly 2 o'clock. His body was discovered just a moment ago at 4:30. We know for sure that the crime was committed sometime during those 2.5 hours. The doors were locked from the inside, and the key was inside the room. Let me reiterate that you must assume that there are no duplicate keys. The window that faced the veranda was unlocked, which means the killer escaped through that window. Koizumi explained the facts. It would be impossible to reach the path to the shack from the window without leaving footprints. The fact that there have been no footprints means that the prints that were once there have been covered by falling snow. He looked over at the calico cat that my sister held. Moreover, Shamisen was present at the scene of the crime when the corpse was discovered. Now, let's think back. Before discovering him with the body, when did we last see the cat? I'd seen him right after Koizumi told everyone to take a bathroom break. He'd been sleeping by the backpack when Koizumi took Haruhi's punishment board game out of it, I told everyone. Wait, really? Haruhi pushed on her forehead with her finger. Now that you mention it, I don't have any memory of seeing the cat for at least 3 hours. Was he really there? I think he was there, said Asahina without much confidence. I saw him a few times when we were playing Fukuwari. He was sleeping on the cushion. That was the last time I saw him too, said Tsuruya. Right when I stood up and had to pee, I saw the kitty cat all curled up in there. I think it was there when we were board gaming it up too. It seemed that based on witness testimony, I was the last one to have seen him, which meant that Shamisen had no alibi from 3 to 4 o'clock. Sometime during the time when we were absorbed with the game, he'd woken up and wandered off somewhere. Eventually, he found his way into Keiichi's room, then snuck into the futon. Wait, that can't be right. There's no way that the cat would decide to go into the shack of his own volition, I said. He hated the cold so much he freaked out by just being outside for a bit. He flinched away from the snow, and he couldn't have opened the door from the main house to the courtyard by himself. This is true. Koizumi voiced his mild agreement.
It stands to reason that someone must have taken him there, either Keiichi or the killer. Well, it couldn't have been Keiichi, Haruhi butted in. He said he was allergic to cats. That was foreshadowing, although it was kind of fake. Of course, that was part of the setup for the mystery. It would have been a bit problematic otherwise, so whoever brought the cat into the room must be the killer. This seems to be the hint. Haruhi raised her hand at Koizumi's declaration. Now wait just a minute. So that means Shamisen was with us until 3, whereupon he went missing. The killer had to leave the shack no later than 4:30. It took half an hour for the snow to cover the tracks, so that narrows it down to 4. That means that the killer took Shamisen and killed Keiichi sometime between 3 and 4. That sounds about right, I said. The hell it does, Haruhi said. Something's wrong. The only ones who left the room at 4 were Tsuruya, Yutaka, and me. But I was with Tsuruya the whole time, so that means she's not the killer. Yutaka's suspicious, but if it took at least half an hour for the snow to cover the tracks, he wouldn't have done it either. Good point, I said. It's no point at all. It means everyone here has an alibi. We were all here playing during that hour. 8 of us played the board game starting at 3. Haruhi, Asahina, Nagato, Koizumi, my little sister, Tsuruya, Yutaka Tamaru, and me. Since the break at 3 until the beginning of the free activity time at 4, not a single one of us had left the common area, except for the cat. Could it have been Arakawa or Mori? Haruhi wondered. The 2 servants were immediately brought in for interrogation. Haruhi sounded like a police detective as she questioned them. Well then, Mr. Arakawa, if that's even your real name, let's hear your alibi, starting at 3 o'clock. Arakawa the butler gave a polite bow. I've been in the kitchen since 2 o'clock. Cleaning up after lunch and preparing for tonight's dinner and tomorrow's breakfast. Do you have anyone that will vouch for that? If I may, said Mori, her smile as pure as her maid uniform. I was with Mr. Arakawa the entire time, helping him prepare. He didn't leave my sight until I went to wake up Mr. Keiichi. Likewise, said Arakawa. At the very least, I can state with confidence that Miss Mori did not leave the kitchen between 3 and 4 o'clock. Which means your testimony for each other. Haruhi nodded thoughtfully. But that means that you could have conspired to commit the crime together, or that one of you is covering for the other. Am I wrong? Haruhi's shining eyes turned to Koizumi, seeking an explanation. That is not the case. This mystery is predicated on a single perpetrator, and neither Arakawa nor Mori would give false testimony. I'll come right out and say it. It was neither of those two, said Koizumi. Well then, who is it? Said Haruhi happily. Everyone's alibi is perfect, which means none of us could have killed Keiichi. Koizumi seemed slightly pleased. Haruhi seemed to have hit upon the point he wanted her to hit. With a smile, he replied, That is precisely what I wanted you to think about and solve. There'd be no game otherwise. The first thing we need to do is think about why the killer needed Shamisen. Having appointed herself chair of the investigation, Haruhi poked at the nose of the calico cat my sister held. Otherwise, what's the point? What was the killer doing that they needed a cat for? If the stupid cat could just talk, he could have provided crucial testimony. I mean, he is a witness after all. What I think is that the killer needed Shamisen to be there for some reason, said Haruhi. Well, even I knew that much. The question was, what was the reason? Kitty, kitty, cat. Asahina muttered charmingly under her breath, her hand touching her chin as she molded over. Cat. Calico cat. Calico. Kitty. Kitty food. She didn't see the beginning anywhere, though. Tsuruya always seemed to have pretty sharp eyes. She stuck out her tongue and rolled her eyes back as she thought. I guess that's how she looked when she was thinking hard. She silently folded her arms, maintaining her funny expression. Speaking of silence, there was Nagato. Although at the moment, it was probably best for her to stay silent. I'd bet with a fair amount of confidence that Nagato had seen through whatever trick Koizumi was playing. Maybe I'd get her to tell us who the culprit was once everyone else had given up, I thought. Shamisen's alibi is a key. If only he hadn't shown himself the whole time. A locked room trick? A locked room using snow to impose a time limit. Muttering to herself, Haruhi suddenly looked up. She regarded Koizumi's smile, then Yutaka's calm expression, then Shamisen's sleepy face. Time limit. Alibi. Oh, I get it! Haruhi suddenly turned to me. Kyon, what do you think of when you hear the word alibi? Cop shows, I answered immediately and then regretted it. Made-for-TV suspense movies. I tried again, then regretted it even more. Time continued to pass on as I tried to think of what to say next. He's a decoy! Haruhi answered her own question. Of course he's a decoy. Shamisen being used to trick us.
Trick us how? I asked.
Just think about it. Here, when does Shamisen's alibi get vague?
From 3 to 4:30. I was the last one to see him before he teleported to the scene of the murder.
Forget about that time period. Think about what happened earlier.
Before 3? Hadn't we just been wandering around the villa then? No. Wait.
Koizumi, when was it that you carried the cat back to the common area?
I thought I noticed Koizumi's handsome smile turn slightly more angular.
Just a bit past 2:30, he said. And where did you bring him from?
The kitchen. Koizumi smiled at Mori.
Isn't that right?
Yes.
Mori looked up at Shamisen for a while.
Just as I was tidying up, the cat came in and started sashaying around at my feet. I gave in and let him have some table scraps, but he only seemed to have become more persistent. So then when Mr. Koizumi passed through, he took the cat with him.
I remember Koizumi saying something about making plans for tomorrow and leaving his seat. And that was at 2:30? In response to my question, the plainly dressed maid gave me a smile so elegant I almost flinched away.
Yes it was. I didn't check the time, so I can't be perfectly accurate, but I think it was around that time.
And when did Shamisen start hanging around you?
At 2 o'clock, when I returned from the shack, he was grooming himself in the kitchen.
Okay, so that much matched up. Our calico cat had roamed around the villa after escaping my younger sister's clutches, had begged for food from Mori, then around 2:30 had been carried by Koizumi back into the common room, where he'd commenced napping on the cushion in front of the heater. So he has an alibi from 2 to 3. There was an explanation for his movements for that hour, but what had Shamisen seen between then and when he went to the shack, I wondered.
And that is where the trick is.
Haruhi narrowed her eyes and stroked her throat. Then, as if something had jumped out at her,
all we know for sure is that 1 hour. The rest is still vague, especially where he went and what he did after 3, the cat's alibi, and when he fell into the hands of the killer.
Haruhi frowned, deep in thought. I went ahead and frowned too. My sister looked up at me with a puzzled expression, while Yutaka only smiled and said nothing. He probably knew the truth, being the prime suspect.
Shall I give you a hint?
No, wait. I cut off Koizumi in thought. It was around 2 o'clock when Keiichi had gone to the shack. The cat was last seen at 3, and nobody had seen him again until we found him with Keiichi's corpse at 4:30. If the killer had exited the shack through the window, it would have to be with enough time for the falling snow to cover his or her tracks, so the murder had happened between 3 and 4. But between 3 and 4, all of us, including Yutaka, were in the open common area, and none of us left. Only at 4 did Yutaka, Haruhi, and Tsuruya leave. Alright, I nodded, satisfied. I give up. Give me a hint. Koizumi shrugged.
I would have thought that the first to notice would be either you or your sister,
was all he said before clamming up again. Huh? What kind of hint was that? I couldn't imagine that my sister was sharper than Tsuruya or Haruhi.
Oh, I see!
Haruhi shouted. Tsuruya's bright voice rang out immediately after Haruhi's.
That's it, Haru Meow! The cat's alibi is the same as the killer's!
She said, the realization all over her face.
Yes, that's it! That's why the cat had to be here! Not just anywhere. Here! Not in the shack, but in the room with everyone else!
I didn't have the slightest idea what she was saying. Asahina and I were dumbstruck.
For that hour, the cat had to be in the place where everyone could see it, because otherwise, the killer's own alibi would be blown.
Tsuruya snapped her fingers.
Shami didn't go missing at 3, but at 2:30. He had 2 hours without an alibi, not just an hour and a half. Which pushes the time of the murder forward half an hour, from between 2:30 to 4. No, sometime in the half hour between 2:30 and 3. Basically, the true crime happened at 2:30, right?
I told them to hold up. The two energetic girls sounded like they were closing in on the truth, but what about the rest of us? I had no clue what they were going on about.
You're so slow, Kyon. Who would be confused by the fact that Shamisen went missing from 3 to 4:30, then was found at the crime scene?
Us, right?
Okay, and who stands to gain from that?
Nobody, I asked. The fact that Shamisen was there meant that the killer took him there, so the moment when Shamisen disappeared is the time of the murder, so...
That's right.
What's right? I wanted to know.
What do you mean, what? That's what everyone would think. That's the trick. The killer needs us to be thinking about the time when Shamisen doesn't have an alibi. Everyone has an alibi from 3 to 4.
said Tsuruya. But what about starting at 2 o'clock? We were told not to leave the room, and we didn't, right?
That's because the killer needed to preserve their alibi between 2 and 3, said Haruhi. So they had to make it seem like Shamisen was still there. Why? Because Shamisen going missing from 3 to 4:30 would actually establish their own alibi. Shamisen couldn't be both here and at the scene of the crime at the same time. If the cat is here, we assume that the killer hasn't taken him yet to the shack. But you were the last person to see Shamisen, and that was around 3 o'clock, making us think that the killer had to have taken Shamisen to the shack sometime after 3. That's the trick! Kyon, don't you see? Think about it this way. We just need to find the person who had the opportunity to kill Keiichi between 2 o'clock when he shut himself in the shack and 4 when we broke in. Turns out it's impossible for everyone except one person. Except that if we narrow it down to 3 o'clock, that person also has an alibi. So what we've gotten wrong is the time of the murder.
Not to be beaten, Haruhi grinned.
Right. Keiichi was killed before 3, and that's when Shamisen was taken to the shack.
No, wait just a second, I said. How do you explain that I saw Shamisen at 3? And what about Asahina seeing him sleeping a bit before 3? Don't tell me he split himself.
You still don't get it.
Haruhi's smile was full of pride.
Let me explain what the killer did. Neither Mori nor Arakawa is the killer, and we don't have to doubt their testimony. Since the game master gave them the stamp of approval, we'll ignore them.
Apparently the only ones who hadn't figured it out were me, Asahina, and my sister. Haruhi looked over at us, then started explaining victoriously.
The killer left the common area sometime between 2 and 3 and took Shamisen out of the kitchen. He or she then took Shamisen to the shack where Keiichi was. It doesn't matter whether it was locked or not. Either way, the killer entered the room and stabbed Keiichi. Then he or she locked the room from inside, left Shamisen there, exited the room via the window, moved around to the path, then returned to the house, empty-handed of course.
Hang on, I said. What about the fact that I saw Shamisen at 3? He was sleeping on the cushion in front of the heater.
That wasn't Shamisen!
Haruhi glanced at Tsuruya, and after having confirmed that Tsuruya's expression indicated agreement, she continued.
It's the logical conclusion. There's only one killer, and only one time the killer could have acted alone was during the few minutes around 2:30. While moving easily between the main house and the shack, it was impossible for everybody else, no matter what time it was. Regardless of his or her alibi, that person is the killer. And what do we need to destroy that alibi? Don't you see? You just need to show that Shamisen went missing around 2:30, which means the only explanation for the Shamisen you saw is that it was a fake.
Tsuruya butted in.
So let me just ask you, Kyon, the Shamisen you saw between 2:30 and 3, was that the real Shamisen?
When she put it that way, I didn't have an answer. I only saw the cat from behind, both when it was picked up and when it was sleeping on the cushion. That's all I saw. But a fake? What kind of fake? Was she saying that Shamisen had secretly cloned himself somewhere along the line? I asked.
Who knows?
Answered Haruhi calmly.
I told you, it's a logical conclusion. The cat you saw on that cushion between 2:30 and 3 was not Shamisen. It couldn't have been Shamisen. I don't know if it was a clone or a doll, or just a look-alike. All I know is that it wasn't your calico. Hey, Haruhi Meow! I think everyone figured it out, so let's just say the name of the killer, Kay? We're just not gonna get anywhere otherwise,
said Tsuruya excitedly, at which Haruhi nodded.
Good point. If we wait for Kyon, he'll be thinking about it all winter break at this rate. Together, then?
Gotcha! The killer is... The two girls smiled together at a certain individual, then, with double-barreled synchronization, shouted out the name of the killer.
Koizumi!
Koizumi raised both hands like a suspect run down by two famous bounty hunters holding Winchester rifles.
Right you are,
he said, his bitter smile looking a bit defeated.
I was the killer. I had hoped you would take a bit more time to think it through, but Suzumiya and Tsuruya were way too sharp.
Haruhi's mouth bent into a smile.
Why did you give us free time starting at 3 instead of 4? It would have taken more time to pin down the culprit, I think. That would have indeed made ascertaining the killer more difficult, Koizumi explained. If any one of you had left for more than 5 minutes starting at 3 o'clock, that's the amount of time it takes to get to the house and the shack and back. And had been alone for that time, that would have made it impossible to exclude you from the list of suspects. In other words, there'd be no way for you to plausibly deny being the killer. So I decided it'd be better to remove everybody from being a suspect. The game would have been too difficult otherwise.
Well, that made sense, but I wonder if he hadn't just thought of it.
Where'd you hide the body double for Shamisen? In my room. I had Arakawa bring it here before the game began. That doesn't make him an accessory from the perspective of the story. I brought it in myself.
With an expression like a day laborer reaching at the end of the shift, Koizumi continued.
After the murder, before returning here, I went and got the double out of my room. The rest, you've figured out.
So that was the cat Koizumi had carried in a bit after 2:30? Still. So where's the cat? I asked again. Where'd the fake go? It still hasn't shown up, not since I spotted it last. Don't tell me you were able to make it disappear again. The defeated Koizumi looked to Haruhi, whereupon our gallant brigade chief marched over to the heater in the corner of the room.
Kyon, think back carefully now. Koizumi was next to the calico cat you saw sleeping on the cushion, right? You took the board game from him, and then you came back to the table, and we were all paying attention to you. Koizumi took the chance to stick the sleeping cat into his backpack. So... Standing by the wall, Haruhi picked up the backpack that was sitting next to the heater vent. That's where it still is. She tipped over the bag, and sure enough, a big ball of fur came tumbling out. Shamisen? I blurted out the name despite myself. The cat really did look like Shamisen. It was a perfect copycat, down to the body shape and pattern, save one big difference. It was female. Male calicos are incredibly rare, and if you want to know why, I suggest asking your biology teacher. The fake Shamisen sat dazedly on the floor for a moment, then eventually flicked her tail and walked over to my sister and sniffed noses with the real Shamisen, whom my sister was holding. The cat was round-eyed at the female, then escaped my sister's clutches and sniffed the female's tail. The two circled around in pursuit of each other's tails, which ended about 10 seconds later when Shamisen took a swipe at the female. Hey, bad Shammy! My sister scooped up the growling Shamisen, whereupon the female calico looked around, then for some reason decided to occupy Nagato's lap. Nagato looked blankly down, meeting the gaze of the cat that looked up at her with a demand in her eyes. Eventually, Nagato extended a hesitant hand. Satisfied with Nagato's timid petting, the imposter kitty curled up and closed her eyes. She certainly did resemble Shamisen, but there were differences. I had lived with Shamisen for 2 months, more than enough time to tell the face of my own household's cat from some other animal. Okay, so that's why you said you thought my sister and I would notice first. Yes, when you got close, I was breaking out in a cold sweat. If you actually noticed, I was playing the whisper into your ear to play along, but based on your expression, you didn't seem to have noticed at all. Sorry, pal. I mentally apologized to Shamisen. The hardest part of all was finding the cat. What follows is Master Koizumi's supplemental explanation. As far as cats identical to Shamisen go, when I started looking, I had no luck finding one. I naively thought that all calicos were equal. How wrong I was. After skipping all over the country, I finally found a stray with similar coloration, though not quite exact. Ultimately, parts of her fur had to be dyed, but even that wasn't enough. She also had to be trained. What kind of training? I asked. She had to learn stay, like a dog. If she started wandering around, that would ruin everything, so I had to teach her to sit still and feign sleep until she got a sign from me. If she moved or meowed during half hour on a cushion, then during the hour and a half inside my backpack, the trick wouldn't have worked. Koizumi shook his head thinking about it. If the cat had actually learned that kind of trick, it might have a future in showbiz, and showbiz would be even easier for the guy who learned how to hypnotize cats. I named her Shamisen II. Shammy2 for short. I couldn't think of anything else. Having given that strange excuse, Koizumi cleared his throat. So, our mystery game has come to an end. I trust no one will mind warding both Suzumiya and Surya for the prize of correctly solving the mystery. Said prize will be presented in a moment. Koizumi bowed slowly. This concludes the day's entertainment. I thank everyone for their cooperation, particularly Surya for the use of her family home, Keiichi Tamaro for playing the role of the victim, Yutaka for acting solely as a misdirection, and Arakawa and Mori for all their help. Thank you all for your support. Haruhi and Surya started clapping like monkeys, followed by my sister, then the baffled Asahina. Seeing even Nagato clapping quietly, Shammy2 still in her lap, I wound up applauding as well. Good job, Koizumi. The prize was a small electroplated trophy. It was decorated with a stylized cat that actually looked a bit like Shamisen doing a headstand. Haruhi and Surya held it up, their fingers flashing V for victory poses, so I gave up and snapped the picture. With Shamisen's 1 and 2, of course. Later, Arakawa brought out the traditional New Year's Eve soba noodles a little early. Haruhi and Surya immediately grabbed their chopsticks and went crazy, while Koizumi's chopsticks barely twitched. Now that I thought about it, I'd never really seen him tear into a meal. Or even eat, really. So how'd you like the game? Well now, this was a rare thing indeed. Even in the House of Illusions the previous day, Koizumi hadn't shown me the slightly uneasy smile he now wore. I didn't really feel like complimenting the scenario, but... I guess it was alright, I said. I gulped down some onions and noodle broth. Haruhi's mood is as good as ever. Aren't you satisfied? Well, that's good, if true.
That means this was worth arranging. It was all for her amusement after all. There was that. It had been nothing but a pain for me, and I couldn't say I felt particularly resolved. Asahina didn't seem to have understood either, as she was busily drawing lines in a memo pad.
This is 2 o'clock, and this is 3, and the cat was from 2 to 3. Wait, half an hour.
Asahina muttered away, slurping up her noodles with a confused-looking face. The person who understood the least was my sister. She hadn't heard a single thing, but there she sat, happily stirring up the contents of her bowl. I breathed a sigh of relief to see Nagato's appetite returning to normal, with the female calico still in her lap. Basically, it was good to see everybody acting like themselves, save Koizumi, who seemed to be trying to elicit sympathy. I've been totally preoccupied by the planning for this ever since the winter trip was announced. Thanks to everyone, I'm finally free. I don't think I'm really cut out to be the killer or mastermind type. I'm happy to leave the detective role to others, too. I think being a commentator suits me best. If it were up to me, I'd have the commentator role abolished. I didn't want to have any more crazy things happening that needed commentary. Just as I was making that wish, an idea flashed through my mind. For the next murder mystery, why bother doing a whole performance? If it's all planned, wouldn't it be easier just to hand out booklets with a script? Koizumi made a face like noodles were stuck in his throat, then spoke like a boxer, bleeding because of an accidental headbutt and being told by the doctor to forfeit. That's a good point, he said unwillingly. So hey, Koizumi. Haruhi spoke up as she got a refill on her noodles from Mori. We're leaving next summer event to you. We've done an island and a snowy mountain, so next we'll need someplace even weirder. Like someplace with a weird name. Someplace overseas might be good. Yeah, like a castle. An old stone castle would be perfect. Haruhi destroyed my dreams and Koizumi's as she whipped around her chopsticks like a baton. I know the perfect place! My dad friend owns a castle overseas. Tsuruya joined in, unfortunately, and seemed even more excited than Haruhi. Hey guys, did you hear that? Get your passports ready for summer! Koizumi and I exchanged a glance and a sigh, proof that neither of us had the strength to withstand the tag teaming of Haruhi and Tsuruya. I was just the guy who was going to try to get Haruhi to give up on her overseas travel plans, and Koizumi was the SOS Brigade's drama producer of last resort. The way things were ending up, battling unseen opponents was starting to sound pretty good. If I didn't do something, we'd really wind up opening an overseas branch of the SOS Brigade. I really didn't want things to get too out of hand, or so I told myself. This was probably the first New Year's Eve I've ever passed without a single glance at a television. We played another round of Haruhi's board game, this time including Mori and the others. As Haruhi had fun and I got worn out, the luxurious dinner and evening conversation came to an end, and eventually we realized that the hour was getting late. Once we wake up tomorrow, we can write our New Year's resolutions and play Hanatsuki in the snow! Haruhi shouted. Hey, at least let us eat some zuni first before we go playing badminton in the snow, I thought. It'll be the new year after all, so we gotta do the basics. Although we've already played Fukuwarai and my board game a little early. Haruhi looked at the wall clock as she continued. It'll be bad if we don't do the first shrine visit of the year too. I didn't think it would be particularly bad. I didn't really care how generous the gods and Buddhas were. I doubted they really wanted Haruhi coming around their temples. The shrine we did our location shooting was probably sending out letters saying we were banned from entering ever again, I told her. What are you talking about? We're lucky enough to live in a country that mixes up all kinds of religions, so it'd be a waste not to do everything. Celebrating Christmas without doing New Year's would be like ordering a gourmet meal and then leaving just after looking at the utensils. We can't miss doing the first shrine visit. Well, in that case, why not build the snow temple out of the yard and stick an offering box in front of it? Of course, we'd dress up Asahina as a shrine maiden and put her inside the temple. That way we didn't have to slog all the way to some existing shrine, and for my part, I'd pray there day and night. Eventually, word would get around, and we get people making the pilgrimage to see her all the time, and I promised the donation box wouldn't run empty. I said. Idiot! Haruhi clung to Asahina's shoulder. Although it's hard to give up on the idea of shrine maidens, I want to see Mikuru in a full kimono. We'll do shrine maidens after we get back from the trip. We'll find some temple or shrine to go to. Oh, obviously Yuki has to dress up too, and so will I! Once Asahina's earlobe turned red from her nibbling, Haruhi checked the time again. Everybody, it's time! At Haruhi's direction, we all sat in a circle, kneeling down the traditional way. In addition to the 5 SOS Brigade members, Tsuruya was also part of the circle, and next to her sat my sister and the 2 cats. Also, the bonus quartet of the Tamaru brothers, the butler, and the maid joined us at Haruhi's behest. Were they really alright with that? I wondered. If things went badly, they'd be winding up getting ordered around like brigade members. But my worries aside, everyone was smiling their own unique smiles, and why not? Show me a guy who's frowning on a day like this, and I'll show you a guy who doesn't have a calendar. I couldn't think of a reason to complain. When Haruhi gave the signal, we all bowed and said the standard Happy New Year's phrase. Odemetou gozaimasu! It's old and boring, but if we changed it, we'd surely miss that phrase.